In today's episode, we're going to be showing you some ordinary people who became extraordinary by putting their lives on the line to make this world a better place. We'll also be showing you some talented artists who show that we still have a long way to go. I'm your host, Ashlyn Super. Let's join Symphony Collins at the National Civil and Human Rights Museum.
Atlanta has always been at the forefront of major movements, and today is no exception. And with the national conversation shifting once again to civil rights, we might as well take a look back at where it all began.
The center opened June 2014, and it was the brainchild of Evelyn Lowry and Ambassador Andrew Young. These civil rights icons wanted a place where we could talk about the American civil rights movement, as Atlanta is seen as the cradle of it. But when they were doing the discussions, you realize that you can't just talk about civil rights in a global city like Atlanta without talking about the human rights movement. And so we have the National Center for Civil and Human Rights. Here, we take the story of the American Civil Rights Movement starting in the 1950s, and we talk about segregation, Jim Crow laws, the grassroots organization of the movement, all the way through the assassination of Dr. King in 1968. And then we explain what human rights are, how we got there in 1948 with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and what that means for us today. I think the one thing that really gets visitors when they come to the center, you kind of start out just reading the exhibits and really just kind of hearing some of the segregationists through our interactives. But when they sit at our lunch counter, it becomes a transformative experience. When they sit there and they hear what it would have been like to be a sit-in participant, when they feel that chair move, and when they understand the sacrifice that those men and women made just so that we could share a Coke all together, it really changes how they view things. It no longer becomes, oh, that was in the past. Suddenly it's very much a, what would I have done in this moment? How would have I reacted? What side would I have been on? And that gets people to really consider what their role in a movement would have been. When we look at people who want to be social justice activists, they realize, maybe I don't need to be on the front lines, but I can be an organizer. I can be somebody that's in the background, or they feel strengthened to be on the front lines. And when people have that experience with the lunch counter, it changes everything when they view the center. They suddenly start placing themselves in those stories, and that is the power. I think the center is important to understanding that change because we need to see where we've been, right? The civil rights movement gives us an amazing blueprint. We see the organization, we see the strategy. We just have to do things a little bit differently. Let's take the March on Washington, for instance, right? You look at the March on Washington, they got 250,000 people to get to Washington in the dead of summer. It's hot. People probably got attitudes because their feet hurt, but they're there for a larger goal. How did they get there? They're making flyers. They're taking buses, planes, trains, automobiles. They're getting there however they could. They don't have Twitter. They don't have Insta. They don't have social media. They don't have cell phones. Some folks probably don't even have phone lines, but somehow they're using their communities. They're using churches. They're getting people in. There's something that we can learn with how they organize the movement. In the center, when you look at that March on Washington display, we talk about the 5,400 Frankfurters, I think it's 27,000 chickens, and it's how many chickens had to die so that we may have wings at the March on Washington. But they had food, they had water, they had medic, they had all of these things. They knew that they would need police, and so you have police there. What they saw was people coming together in peace. They did all of this without social media. So what we can learn from like the March on Washington is how did they organize? How did they get the word out? How did they lay things out? What did they need in order for it to be successful? When we look at movements today, we often say that we're good at strategizing and mobilizing, but the organizing gets a little mixed up. And I think using examples from the past to help us move through the present, and not just in the United States. In the Global Human Rights Gallery, we see movements from across the globe. How did those work out? How did the arts play in protest? How did we get entertainers to get on board with the messaging? How did we get them to share and feel when they may not be in the same social or economic class, but they realize the fight for human rights hits all of us? So I think when people come into the center and they see that, they see where we've been, they see what we've overcome, but they also saw what was necessary, it should leave them with ideas of like, okay, great. What would a March on Washington in 2020, 2025, 2030 look like using the strategies from 1963? We've seen plenty of marches on Washington since then. What would it look like if we took that exact same blueprint and laid it out? It's a completely different world, but it's something to think about. Segregationists behind me, they were the ones that enforced these racist laws that really, from the end of Reconstruction up until the Civil Rights Act, really ran the country. These were the laws that said that black and whites couldn't be together, they couldn't do anything together, they couldn't engage together, or else they'd be breaking the law and violence could ensue. This was really, breaking down segregation was really kind of one of the key issues of the civil rights movement. Because how are we ever going to be able to be seen as equal if we're doing things separately? When Brown versus Board came down, it ruled that separate but equal was unconstitutional because you can't be separate and have equal things. And so that fight to change and to break down these Jim Crow laws, some of which are still on the books in certain counties, check your counties to make sure that these laws have been expunged, it really started this wave and this movement. So that men like Bull Connor and Strom Thurmond, they become not necessarily irrelevant, but their powers become limited. Because when you have a divided society and you want to uphold bigoted laws, you hold this power. But when communities come together to break down those laws and to change them, to have a more perfect union, what you get is this loss of power, but also it starts to really create this equitable society. It's one that we dream of, it's one that we're still fighting for. But until we knock down those Jim Crow laws, men like Bull Connor, men like Sheriff Jim Clark in Arkansas, they would still be running their counties, their cities, their states. And yes, there are still vestiges of their legacy, but it's our jobs today to ensure that Jim Crow, when we're talking about it, remains a thing of the past, and it is not something that we carry on to the future. And when we have people come to the center, when they see that these struggles and these movements aren't just for one group or one people, that this is something that's been happening for years all over the globe, it gets people to understand that, one, they're not alone. When they feel like they need to create change and they want to seek examples or they want to find inspiration, they come here to do that. With the launch of the Campaign for Equal Dignity, which was in response to the coronavirus pandemic, we started to focus on things like voter suppression and voting rights. We looked at public education and healthcare as a human right. We really started to look at systemic racism and the role that it plays in our society. And so when people are looking for what can I do next and how can I be engaged, we tell them, join the campaign. Be that voice in your community. Be the one that creates change. And so they can go to our website and check out the Campaign for Equal Dignity, where they can sign the pledge, and they can also learn what they can be doing on a weekly basis, on a daily basis, monthly, annually. We just want people to find a way to be a part of their communities, to solicit and create the change that is so desperately needed. We don't know all of their names, but we can't forget their legacies. And I think generationally, that's the one thing that we need to consider. There are multiple avenues to get where we ultimately need to go. It's gonna look different, it's gonna be different, it's gonna feel different, because for each generation, the needs are gonna shift. We're gonna make a little bit of progress, but we're still gonna have to break down some other walls. And what worked in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s didn't necessarily work in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. What worked in the 70s, 80s, and 90s isn't necessarily gonna work today. But as long as we keep focus on those goals and what we need to be doing, we're gonna get there.
Through its interactive and engaging exhibits, the National Center for Human and Civil Rights is dedicated to reminding us of our past, transforming our present, and inspiring our future.
Thanks, Symphony. Hearing all of those stories makes me wonder what kind of impact I might have in this world. But speaking of making an impact, Devonna Watson is on the southwest side of Atlanta in a unique home where the walls are filled with art dedicated to civil and human rights.
We're visiting the West End of Atlanta here at the Hammond House Art Museum. There are a lot of beautiful pieces inside, So let me take you in and show you what makes this place so special.
Dr. Hammond was a prominent doctor here in the Atlanta area, and he had an extensive art collection, an exciting art collection. He had about 250 pieces that really reflected the very important artists of the time. But then Dr. Hammond, he had the very important artists, but then he would find art in many places. There was a sale at one of the local jails, and one of the really great pieces in the collection is a piece that he bought from an inmate who was, doing art. And we often wonder, who was this person and where is he now? Because it's such a great piece that he did. So that's who Dr. Hammond was. Not only was he a collector, a very avid collector, but he was also a huge arts patron. So not only did he collect work and put money in the pockets of artists, but he also really supported arts organizations. So the Neighborhood Arts Organization, which was very big at that time, the High Museum, he sat on the board of the High. For Dr. Hammond, it was really, really important for art to really flow through the city of Atlanta. The house was built in 1857. So the house is a pre-Civil War home. So when Dr. Hammond purchased this home, he was the first African-American owner of this house. The house, no one had lived in the house for a very, very long time, so it was in total disarray, it was dilapidated. People had come in and stolen the fireplaces, the mantles, and all those things that people do with old houses. And so it took him about 2 years just to source the materials after he purchased the house to bring it back to its Victorian beauty. So he went all over the world looking for pieces. So when you look at the detail in this house, some of it came from as far away as Germany, chandeliers that came from Europe, because he really wanted to make it reflect the time period of the time period that it was built in. He took 2 years to source, another 2 years to really do the build out, to renovate the house. He lived here for about a year before he died. When he passed, Fulton County was led at the time by Dr. Michael Lomax, who now is the head of the United Negro College Fund. And so Dr. Lomax knew how painstakingly he had not only collected all of that artwork, but also put this house back together. And so he thought that this would be a perfect home for an African American research library. So with county funds, they purchased this house thinking that it would be African American research space. And the library had different plans. They weren't interested. They wanted to be closer to downtown. So we know the Auburn Avenue Research Library exists now. So now you have the county having this house on this list of a property, and they're trying to figure out what to do with it. So Ed Spriggs, who had been the second director of the Studio Museum of Harlem, was here in Atlanta and was actually at Fulton County working in public art. And he had this idea that Atlanta needed an African-American standalone museum. So he, along with a coalition, went to the county and they put forth a proposal for the Hammond House Museum to become a thing, to become an institution. And Dr. Lomax gavelled it, and so the Hammond House Museum was born, and so that was in 1988. It holds Dr. Hammond's name for a few reasons. First of all, it is his house. Second of all, his collection was really the base of the collection that has built from those 250 pieces. We now have double that. As a matter of fact, I just brought 3 pieces in this week that we had 3 new acquisitions. So we have continued to acquire art over the past 32 years. And also, it's the continuation of his legacy, as well as what the new thing is. The new thing is, how do we cultivate and how do we provide a space for this new generation of artists in the 21st century. When you look through it, we have the most number of Romare Beartons in the Southeast. We've got work by Elizabeth Catlett, by Nellie Mae Rowe, by Bill Traylor, Hale Woodruff. It is a who's who of artists from the 20th century. The oldest piece, an artist named Robert Scott Duncanson, we have the oldest piece of Duncanson's work. It's a number of different pieces, but all of it is really, really important work by very important artists. Now that was the early part of the collection, so that's what he collected. And then since that time, more contemporary artists like Radcliffe Bailey, Amalia Maki, like Tina Duncanson. So those artists are in the second part of the collection, which is the Hammond House collection. Translocation and Transfiguration is by an artist named Masood Olufani. Masood is a local artist in that he lives locally, originally from New York, lives here in Atlanta, and Masood deals a lot with objects. So he talked a lot about, he collects a lot of objects because he knows that eventually he's going to use it in his work. This year, we wanted to center on Blackness. What does it mean and what does it mean to whom? This idea of Blackness. And so we thought it appropriate to start this, kick off the season with Masood's work. So when you walk through the exhibition, you'll see a lot of the way that he deals with contemporary issues in the work. But then also there are a number of ways that he kind of looks back to deal with contemporary issues. And you recognize that, there's a piece called Freedom's Price that focuses on the freedom riders from the 1960s that would come down to help people vote. The reality, though, is that, some of the same issues that we were dealing with then, where people's voices and their votes were being suppressed, are the same issues that we're dealing with now. So he reaches back into the past to also bring forth issues that are contemporary and that connect with audiences. And so it's a pretty brilliant exhibition. The mission and the vision for us today hasn't really changed. Our focus and our work is always geared towards the elevation of this work. How do we elevate Black artists and provide them with a space to exhibit their work, a space to become who they are to become, but then also how do we tell the story about the work and the contributions these artists have made to world culture. It's about really the voices and the lens through which they look through that help people, see themselves or help people see something different. So whether you're African American or other, Black artists are really truth tellers, and so we can all look through those lenses, and they really have impacted society through the work that they've done. Well, they should come here and visit because, this history and this, the preservation of this information is really, really important, and it doesn't matter who you are, learning about this history, whether you're African American and you're learning about the history, whether you're African or from the diaspora and connecting to the history, or whether you are white or Latina or Asian and connecting to the history, it's all really, really important because this is the way that we figure out who we are and who are we in relation to other people, and knowing the history of other cultures is always very, very important. I am a lifelong learner, so I like going into spaces and walking away with some new bit of knowledge, something that I didn't know or something that amazed me, or what have you. And so I think that that's what people get when they come to the Hammond House Museum. They're going to come here and they're going to see something that will amaze them, whether it is because it's a beautiful exhibition or it's a beautiful piece of poetry that they heard at a poetry event or a reading or a lecture where they walked away with information that they didn't have, or it may be an artist that they already know and they get to see like a different aspect of that artist or something different in the artwork. But there's so many reasons to enjoy art and just kind of walk into a space and be transformed. People that come into this museum generally are people who are avid art lovers, and they know that we have a great collection. They are art lovers and they know we have a great exhibition up, or they are extremely interested in the history. And those are the people that come to this museum. They're people that, kind of pop in because they saw it someplace or they heard it someplace, and then they come, they're in awe of the house. There's some people that just love the home, When you hit the door of the Hammond's house, you feel something different, and that something magical is getting ready to happen. And I think that alone is kind of a sacred space at times. At times it's family, at times it's like deep, deep community. So that is what this house is to so many different people. I like the idea, though, that as a smaller organization that you have the ability to be as creative as you can be, as you want to be, as long as you stay within the confines of the budget. But you really have that creativity. We have partnered with so many people in the community, and then also being a community space, a space where the community feels like they can come here and get married. They can come here and have their family reunion or their baby shower or their birthday party, or just when they want to sit down and have a community meeting to talk about the Beltline, that this is that place, So the Hammond's House is a space. I have adopted this kind of terminology, artistic excellence, culture, and community, and that is what we do here.
It's places just like this that make Atlanta truly special. The history and culture run deep in the city's roots. And around every little corner, you find special little treasures just like this one.
I wonder what Mr. Hammond would say if he saw all that thought-provoking art in his home. I bet he would be honored. Well, that's all we have for today. We'll see you next time on Georgia Detours.